the first thing that we need to do is we need to establish our trim lines, because we are going to really limit the amount of the model that we really need to worry about. A UCBL trim line is distal to the medial malleolus, and here is the distal aspect of the medial malleolus. It encompasses the navicular. Here's the navicular. For pronation, the trim line will be proximal to the first metatarsal head. Okay. It will be at least 15 millimeters deep, the height of it, around the posterior aspect of the heel, and it will be distal to the lateral malleolus and high enough over the dorsum to fully encompass the lateral aspect of the foot. If this trim line is too low, the foot will move over top of it or will experience edge pressure. A good rule of thumb in determining the height of trim lines or the location of trim lines has to do with the trim line should be well away from the center of pressure. The center of pressure is going to be right along the shank of the fifth metatarsal, and so this trim line should be well away from the center of pressure so that you don't have high focal pressure along the edge. And then the lateral trim line will extend to the lateral toe sulcus. And so that is my trim line for a UCBL, which manages pronation. On the medial side, distal to the medial malleolus and encompassing the navicular. And so sloping up, and again, we want this trim line to be away from the arch support element of the orthosis, so it needs to be well dorsal to the center of pressure on the medial side, encompassing the navicular so as not to cause edge pressure there. And again, distal to the medial malleolus and sweeping back to the posterior trim line. The trim line that we're going to make for this device, since there's no forefoot element in this device, and we assume no forefoot pathology, the trim line here, because we want to encompass the lateral aspect of the fifth med head, because we want to resist abduction of the forefoot away from the medial arch element, the trim line for this orthosis will be the toe sulcus, like that. Okay, so it's a sulcus length foot plate. And so within that trim line is really all we need to do our buildups for. Okay. Now again, I do my reliefs after I do my reductions. I'm going to do my reliefs by views. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little bit of a relief on the posterior calcaneus, and I'm going to open up the contour of the posterior aspect of the calcaneus, like this. I basically took this curvature of the calcaneus that was continuing to curve down, and I opened it up so that it's cylindrical here. And the reason for that is if the calcaneus pistons moves up out of the heel cup, I don't want that curvature to hit into the proximal trim line of the orthosis. If I let the orthosis wrap around too much, then it may become uncomfortable when the heel lifts up a little bit. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease the radius of curvature of the posterior heel, like this. The radius of curvature of the posterior aspect of the heel was larger because it's a semi-weight bearing, actually a non-weight bearing impression. By decreasing the radius of curvature, I create less slope so that when the foot steps on the mold, it won't slide down that slope and again cause irritation, cause shear. So that's all I'm going to do to the heel. On the medial side, I'm going to do a build-up for the navicular. And this is going to be basically a spherical buildup for the navicular. I'm going to basically take the shape of the navicular bone, which really isn't spherical, it's oblong, and I'm going to increase its dimension focally. I'm not going to wash out or try and blend my buildup too much, because it loses its effectiveness if it's blended too much. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to fill the arch just slightly to help me blend it. I've got the arch height the way that I believe I want it, based on my clinical presentation, inventing a scenario. I want to make sure that my arch is smooth and well blended, just removing a lot of the artifact. And then over the dorsum, I don't want the orthosis to wrap too tightly over the dorsum of the foot here. And so I'm taking that curvature of the first metatarsal shank, and I'm this curvature, and I'm opening it dorsally. That way it doesn't wrap over the top of the foot. Okay, that's all I'm going to do medially. On the lateral side, I'm going to do, it depends on the prominence, the height of the prominence, but I'm going to do a build-up, slight wash build-up over the base of the fifth metatarsal. Some people have more prominence over the base of the fifth metatarsal than others. Remember that it's not just a lateral build-up, it may also be, there may be a contour plantarly. Okay? And I'm going to do a build-up for the head of the fifth metatarsal. And this is important. This device and the lateral border, the lateral containment on the forefoot, the purpose of that is three-point bending, to keep the forefoot from abducting away from the arch support element. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a restraint to keep the foot from abducting away from the arch support. I'm going to apply this adduction stress or pressure to the forefoot along the shank of the fifth metatarsal. I don't really want to apply it focally at the head or the base. I want my pressure to be minimum in order to do the job. And so I want the broadest bearing surface that I can have, which is the shank of the fifth metatarsal. Not the head and the base, which are much smaller areas. Okay. Now on the plantar aspect, as we did with the foot orthosis, I am going to square at and distal to the toe sulcus. This orthosis is going to really stop at the toe sulcus, but it's going to extend a little bit past. So I want it to be square, just distal to the apex of the fifth metatarsal head. And on the medial side, I also want this foot plate to be square from the proximal aspect of the first metatarsal head to the toe sulcus. And you can see actually that on a UCBL adult, all of my buildups that I've done came from one small cup of plaster.